The rain had been falling for almost 6 hours when the boy first saw him, and still the old man was standing at the wrong corner of Beacon Street, turning in a slow, careful circle the way a person turns when the world he used to know has rearranged itself behind his back. He had no umbrella. His coat, a long camel-colored thing that must have been beautiful once, was so wet it had gone dark across the shoulders and was beginning to drip from the hem onto his shoes. His hair, what little of it the rain had not flattened, was white as paper. He was holding a folded piece of newspaper over his head, as if that small, dry square could still pretend to be a roof, and he was speaking softly to himself in the way old people speak when they are trying not to be afraid. No one stopped for him. In a town like Millbrook, on a Thursday evening in March, with a cold spring storm pushing sideways down every street, and the streetlights only just beginning to flicker on, people kept their heads down and their car doors locked and went home to whatever supper was waiting. An old man on a corner was the kind of small wrong thing that adults learned a long time ago to walk past, because stopping meant explaining, and explaining meant being late, and being late meant a conversation at the kitchen table that no one wanted to have. But the boy stopped. His name was Jonah Reeves. He was 11 years old, and he had been on his way home from the public library with 3 books pressed against his chest under his jacket to keep them dry. He saw the old man from half a block away, saw the slow, confused turning, saw the newspaper held overhead like a paper bird trying to be a tree, and he stopped on the sidewalk and stood very still in the rain and looked. Something inside him, some small, careful instrument his mother had built in him before everything else in his life had been taken apart, was already pointing toward the corner before his feet had agreed to move. He did not know, standing there in the rain with his library books pressed against his ribs, that the man at the wrong corner of Beacon Street was a man whose name was painted in gold letters on the side of a building 40 miles away in the city. He did not know that the long black car that would pull up in front of his grandmother's house the very next morning belonged to a family that had not lost a member to a public sidewalk in 3 generations. He only knew that the old man was wet, and that the old man was lost, and that the old man's hands, when he lowered the newspaper for a moment to wipe his face, were shaking in a way that hands shake when a person has been cold for too long and has begun to stop noticing. That single decision, made in the gray rain of a Thursday in March by a boy carrying 3 library books under his jacket, would change 2 families, 1 small town, and the rest of a life that nobody, least of all Jonah Reeves, had any reason to believe could be changed at all. Before we get into the rest of this story, leave a comment and tell me where you are watching from tonight, and if you believe that small acts of kindness still matter in a world that often forgets to notice them, hit the subscribe button so you do not miss the next one. Millbrook in early March was a town that had not yet decided whether winter was finished with it. The maple trees along Beacon Street were bare, their wet branches clicking softly against each other in the wind. The sidewalks were dark with rain and patched with the last gray crusts of snow tucked into the shaded places along the curbs where the sun had not yet reached. The flower shop on the corner had put out its first crate of daffodils that morning, hopeful and yellow, and the daffodils were now bowed under the weight of the water, their faces turned toward the gutter. A loose gutter pipe somewhere above the hardware store was tapping out a slow, uneven rhythm against the brick, the way an old radiator taps when the building is settling. The streetlights had come on early, all of them at once, the way streetlights do when a storm has fooled the timers into believing it is later than it is. Jonah stood for one more moment in the rain. Then he crossed the street. He crossed carefully, the way his mother had taught him before she got sick, looking both ways twice even on a street where no cars were coming, because looking twice was a small free thing and you did not waste small free things. The rain came at him sideways. His sneakers, which were not new and had never been quite waterproof, made small wet sounds on the pavement. When he reached the corner where the old man was standing, he stopped about an arm's length away, the way a person stops when they want to be noticed but do not want to startle anyone, and he said, very clearly so that he would not have to say it twice, "Sir, are you all right?" The old man turned. He had a long, thin face with deep lines around the mouth, the kind of face that had spent a lot of years being serious about things, and his eyes were a pale, washed-out gray that did not quite focus at first. They moved over Jonah slowly, taking him in piece by piece, the wet hair, the jacket zipped up over the lump of library books, the careful, steady way the boy was standing in the rain without complaining about being in it. For a moment the old man did not answer. He blinked twice. He lowered the newspaper. "I am not sure," he said finally. His voice was low and dry and had a small tremor in it that was not, Jonah understood right away, only from the cold. "I am not sure that I am, young man." "Are you lost, sir?" Jonah asked. The old man looked around him at the wet sidewalk, at the bowed daffodils outside the flower shop, at the street sign on the pole above his head. His eyes moved across the letters of the street name without seeming to gather them up into a word. He looked back down at Jonah. He gave a small, dry laugh that was not really a laugh, the kind of sound a person makes when they are trying not to admit something out loud. "I believe I might be," he said. "Yes, I believe I am." "Do you know where you live, sir?" The old man opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. He said, "I live at 22, and then he stopped, and his pale gray eyes moved past Jonah at something that was not on Beacon Street at all, but somewhere further back, somewhere a long time ago, and after a long moment he said in a smaller voice, "I am sorry. The number is just there. I can almost see it. It is just there." Jonah did not say anything for a few seconds. He stood very still in the rain, and the rain ran down the back of his neck and under the collar of his jacket and made a cold line all the way down his spine, and he did not move. He understood, in the way an 11-year-old who has lived through certain things understands, that the old man was not drunk and was not joking and was not playing any kind of game. The old man's mind, in this moment, had folded a corner of itself down and was not quite able to find the corner again. His grandmother, who he lived with now, had begun to do the same thing in small, careful ways over the past year. She would set the kettle on the stove and forget that she had set the kettle on the stove. She would call him by his uncle's name and then look at his face and look frightened for a second before she put the name back into the right shape. He had learned not to point it out. He had learned to pour the kettle quietly when it whistled, and to answer to whatever name she gave him, because the worst thing, the thing that hurt her most, was being reminded that she had forgotten. "It's okay, sir," Jonah said. He shifted the books under his jacket so they would not slip. "Sometimes things go away for a minute and then they come back. Do you have anything in your pockets that might say where you live, like a wallet or a card?" The old man looked down at himself as if he had not, until that moment, considered that he was wearing a coat at all. He patted slowly at the front of the long camel coat, the way a man pats himself looking for a key. His gloved hand moved to the inside breast pocket. It paused there. He felt something. His face changed just a little, the way a face changes when a small certainty returns from wherever it had gone. "There is a wallet," he said. "Yes, there is a wallet in here. My daughter, she insists. She put a card in it." "Could I help you look, sir?" Jonah asked. "We could stand under the awning by the flower shop. It is drier there." The old man considered this. Then he nodded very seriously, the way a person nods when they have decided to trust a stranger and are not yet sure they should have. "Yes," he said. "Yes, young man, thank you. I think that would be a good idea." Jonah did not reach for the old man's arm. He had learned that, too, from his grandmother. Old people did not always want to be steered. They wanted to be walked beside. So he stepped half a pace ahead and said, "It's just there, sir, 10 steps maybe." And he moved slowly enough that the old man could follow without feeling chased. The flower shop had a green canvas awning that hung out over the sidewalk in a long, slow curve. And beneath it, the rain became suddenly a sound instead of a thing. A soft drumming over their heads that made the air seem warmer by comparison, even though it was not. The old man stepped under the awning and let out a long breath, and Jonah saw the breath cloud in front of his face, and he understood that the old man had been outside for longer than was good for him. "Take your time, sir," Jonah said. "There is no rush." The old man worked the buttons of his coat with stiff fingers. The buttons were small horn buttons sewn on with the kind of careful stitching that a person notices only when it is missing from other coats, and his fingers fumbled over them twice before the front of the coat fell open. Underneath, he was wearing a dark gray sweater of fine wool and a shirt with a soft collar, and Jonah saw, in the brief moment before the coat closed again around him, that the sweater and the shirt were both very clean and very nice, the kind of clothes a person wears when someone else has been laying them out in the morning. He reached into the inside pocket and brought out a leather wallet that had gone soft with use, the corners rounded, the surface darkened where a thumb had passed over it 10,000 times. He held the wallet in both hands for a moment as if he had forgotten what it was for. Then his face cleared a little and he opened it. "There," he said, his voice steadied. "She wrote it on a card. She wrote it because I asked her to." "I told her, Margaret," I said, "write it on a card and put it in the wallet because there will come a day," and she wrote it. He drew out a small white card, no bigger than a playing card, and held it out toward Jonah with a hand that was not quite as shaky as before. "Will you read it, young man? My eyes in this light." Jonah took the card carefully. It was printed in plain black ink in a font that was easy to read on purpose. It said, "If found, please call the number below." "My name is Walter A. Whitman. I live at 22 Elm Hollow Lane, Millbrook. I sometimes forget. Please be kind." Below that there was a phone number written by hand in a careful, old-fashioned cursive that sloped slightly to the right. Jonah read it once to himself. Then he read it again out loud, slowly, so that the old man could hear the words. 22 Elm Hollow Lane, he said. Mr. Walter Whitman. The old man's face did something then that Jonah would remember for a long time afterward. The deep lines around his mouth softened, and his pale gray eyes filled, not with tears exactly, but with the wet shine that comes into the eyes of a person who has just been handed something they were afraid was lost. He nodded slowly. He said the name to himself under his breath. Walter, yes, Walter Whitman, 22 Elm Hollow. He said it the way a man says a prayer he had known by heart since childhood and had only briefly forgotten the first line of. "That's you, sir," Jonah said, and he tried to say it gently, the way you tell a person something they already know but might be glad to hear out loud. "That's me," the old man said. He took the card back from Jonah with both hands and tucked it very carefully into the wallet, and the wallet very carefully into the inside pocket of his coat, and he buttoned the coat back up over it one slow button at a time. When he was done, he looked at Jonah with a clearness that had not been in his eyes a few minutes ago, and he said, "I know that street, young man, Elm Hollow. I have lived on that street for 51 years. I do not know how I came to be on Beacon. Sometimes it happens, sir," Jonah said. "My grandma does it too. She walks out for the mail and forgets where the mailbox is. It does not mean anything bad about her. It just means her mind took a wrong turn for a minute." The old man looked at the boy for a long moment under the green awning, with the rain drumming overhead, and something in his face that had been clouded began to clear in a different way, as if he were seeing Jonah now for the first time properly, not just as a small shape in the rain, but as a person. "Your grandmother is lucky," he said quietly, "to have a grandson who knows how to say a thing like that." Jonah did not know what to do with the compliment. He had not been spoken to that way by an adult in a long time, in the kind of way that treated him as a person worth being lucky to know, and the words landed in him somewhere he was not used to having things land. He looked down at his wet sneakers. He shifted the books under his jacket. He said, because he did not know how else to answer it, "Elm Hollow is far, sir. It is on the other side of the river. We should call the number on the card." "Yes," Walter said. "Yes, we should." "Margaret will be worried." He paused. His gloved hand patted the front of his coat again at the same place where the wallet had been, and then it moved to the other side, the outer pocket, and patted there. Then it moved to the pocket on the opposite side. Then it moved back to the first place. His face changed. The clearness that had come into it under the awning began to slip out of it again, and Jonah, watching, felt his own stomach tighten the way a stomach tightens when you see a glass begin to tip on the edge of a table. "I have left it," Walter said. "I have left the telephone at the house. I do not know why. I always carry it. Margaret puts it in this pocket. She puts it here." He tapped the outside breast pocket of the coat twice, 3 times. The pocket was empty. "I do not know why I have left it." "It is okay, sir," Jonah said quickly. He was not sure that it was okay, but he had learned with his grandmother that telling a person it was okay was sometimes the first step in making it so. "We can use a phone. There is a phone at the library. The librarian, Miss Adler, she lets me use it sometimes if I need to call my grandma. The library is 3 streets that way. Could you walk 3 streets, sir? Or we could wait here and I could go and bring Miss Adler back." Walter shook his head. He was already nodding slightly to himself, gathering something. "I can walk 3 streets, young man. I would prefer to walk 3 streets. I would prefer not to stand still." He looked out from under the awning at the rain, which had not slackened and was, if anything, falling harder now in slow, heavy drops that bounced off the pavement. "Although I am afraid I will get you very wet." "I am already wet, sir," Jonah said. And for the first time since he had crossed the street, he allowed himself the small luxury of a smile, the careful kind he used with his grandmother when he wanted her to feel that things were ordinary. Wetter does not really make a difference once you are already wet. Walter looked at him for a second longer, and then a small, dry chuckle came out of him, a real one this time, the kind that begins in the chest and not in the throat, and Jonah saw the deep lines around the old man's mouth move into shapes they had clearly been used to moving into for a great many years before the rain had ever caught him on Beacon Street. "That is true, young man," Walter said. "That is mathematically true." Jonah did not know what mathematically meant in that sentence, but he understood from the way Walter said it that it was a kind of compliment, and he tucked it away in the same place he had tucked away the other one. He waited until Walter had gathered the front of his coat closed again, and then he said, "I am going to walk on the side closer to the street, sir, so the cars do not splash you. If you want to hold my shoulder for the curbs, that is okay. My grandma does sometimes." He did not look at Walter's face when he said it. He had learned that too. You did not look at a proud person when you were offering them a small mercy because looking made the mercy heavy. Walter did not say anything. But after a moment when Jonah stepped out from under the awning and back into the rain, Walter stepped out beside him, and his gloved hand came to rest very lightly on the boy's shoulder, just a brush of contact, just enough weight to steady himself without leaning. They began to walk. The rain was coming down harder now in long, cold sheets that swept down Beacon Street and rattled in the gutters and made the streetlights bloom in soft halos overhead. The few cars that passed went slowly, their wipers beating fast, their headlights cutting yellow tunnels through the wet air. None of them stopped. None of them slowed. The boy and the old man walked together on the sidewalk. The boy on the outside near the curb with his library books pressed against his ribs. The old man on the inside with one gloved hand resting featherlight on the boy's small, wet shoulder. And the cane of the street, which Walter had not been carrying because he had left without it, was replaced for those 3 blocks by an 11-year-old child who had decided, without making any speech about it, that he would be the cane. The Millbrook Public Library sat at the corner of Beacon and 3rd, a small brick building with tall, narrow windows and a green copper roof that had gone the color of old pennies. Its front steps were broad and shallow and worn smooth in the middle from 112 years of children running up them and grown people coming carefully down. A single brass lamp burned above the front door even in the daytime, and the light of it spilled out yellow and steady onto the wet steps and made the rain look, just for a moment as they approached, like something gentler than it was. Jonah went up the steps first and held the heavy door open with his shoulder. Walter climbed slowly, one step at a time, both gloved hands free now and resting on the iron railing. When they were both inside, the door closed behind them with a soft thunk, and the rain went from being a whole world to being a sound on the other side of a wall, and the warm, dry library smell of paper and old wood and floor polish closed around them like a held breath. Miss Adler was at the front desk. She was a tall, thin woman in her 60s with a long gray braid that came over one shoulder, and she had been the librarian in Millbrook for as long as anyone in the town who was still living could remember. She looked up when the door opened, and she saw Jonah, whom she knew, and then she saw the old man in the wet camel coat standing beside him, and her face changed in a small, careful way that Jonah had seen on her face once before, on the afternoon his mother had died and he had come into the library because he had not known where else to go. Miss Adler's face, when something was wrong, did not become alarmed. It became attentive. "Jonah," she said. She came out from behind the desk. "Goodness, child, you are soaked through. Come in, and sir, please let me take your coat. The radiator in the reading room is on. Come and stand by it." "Miss Adler," Jonah said, "this is Mr. Walter Whitman. He lives on Elm Hollow. He got turned around on Beacon and his phone is at his house. He has a card in his wallet with his daughter's number. He needs to call her." Miss Adler did not ask any of the questions an adult might have asked. She did not say, "Where are your parents? Where did you find him? Are you sure he is who he says he is?" She looked once at Jonah's face and once at Walter's face, and she nodded as if she had been told exactly what she needed to be told. "Of course," she said. "The phone is right here at the desk. Mr. Whitman, please, your coat. Jonah, take him to the reading room. I will bring the phone in to you on the long cord. There are no patrons at the moment. You will have it to yourselves." Walter let her help him out of the coat. His thin shoulders under the wet camel wool were narrower than the coat had made them look, and the dark gray sweater underneath was dry only in the very center of his chest. Miss Adler hung the coat over the back of a wooden chair near the radiator in the reading room, where the steam pipes ticked softly, and the air was so warm it made the inside of Jonah's nose prickle. She brought Walter to the chair beside the radiator and helped him sit. She brought Jonah a thick blue towel from a closet behind the desk, the same towel Jonah recognized that she had brought him on the afternoon he had come in after his mother. She did not say anything about that. She simply set it in his hands and squeezed his shoulder once, briefly, and went to fetch the phone. Walter sat in the chair by the radiator with his thin hands folded in his lap. His pale gray eyes had taken on the soft shine of a person who has just come in from the cold and has not yet begun to feel warm, only to feel that he is no longer freezing, which is a different thing. He looked around the reading room slowly, at the green-shaded lamps on the long wooden tables, at the shelves of books with their spines neatly aligned, at the old map of Millbrook County on the wall above the fireplace, and a small change came over his face, not all at once but gradually, the way light changes in a room when a cloud finally moves off the sun. "I know this room," he said quietly. "I used to come here as a boy. I used to sit at that table over there by the window. They had a set of encyclopedias with green leather bindings. Are they still there? Jonah looked. On the shelf nearest the window, low down where a child could reach them, there sat a long row of thick books bound in green leather, their gold-stamped letters dulled but still legible. Yes, sir, he said. They are still there. Walter smiled, and the smile reached all the way into his pale gray eyes, and for the first time that afternoon the eyes did not look lost at all. Miss Adler came back with the phone, the old beige one from the desk with the long curling cord, and she set it on the small wooden table beside Walter's chair without making any fuss. She nodded to Jonah and stepped back out of the reading room and pulled the door almost closed behind her, leaving only a sliver of light from the front desk, the way she might have closed the door on a person making any private telephone call. Jonah understood that this was kindness, too. He had not known until that afternoon how many shapes kindness could take inside one single hour. Walter took the wallet out of the inside pocket of his coat, which Miss Adler had hung on the chair, and he took the small white card out of the wallet, and he held it under the lamplight and read the number aloud once to himself before he dialed. His finger trembled a little on the rotary, but he turned each digit carefully, and the dial clicked back into place each time with the small patient sound that old phones make. Jonah sat on the rug in front of the radiator and rubbed at his hair with the blue towel and tried not to listen too closely, because he understood without being told that the conversation that was about to happen belonged to Walter and not to him. The phone rang twice. Then there was a voice on the other end, a woman's voice, and even from where Jonah sat across the room he could hear that the voice was already half broken before the first word of greeting was through. "Daddy?" Walter closed his eyes. "Margaret," he said. His voice was very quiet. "Margaret, I am all right. I am at the Millbrook Library. A young man brought me here. I am all right." The woman on the other end of the line said something that Jonah could not make out, and then she said it again, and then there was the unmistakable sound of a person crying while trying very hard to keep speaking. Walter listened. He did not interrupt her. He let her say what she needed to say, and he answered her in small, steady sentences that were meant only to hold her up while she said it. "Yes, I am dry now. Yes, I am sitting down. No, I do not know how I came to be on Beacon. I went out for the paper, and the next thing I knew. Yes, yes, Margaret, I am sorry. Yes." Jonah looked at the rug. He looked at his sneakers, which had begun to make a small dark puddle on the floor. He thought about his mother. He thought about the afternoon she had finally not come home, and the phone call that had come instead, and the way his grandmother had answered the phone in the kitchen and had said yes, and then yes again in a voice that got smaller each time, until the last yes was no bigger than a thread. He had been 9 years old then. He had not known, listening from the hallway, that he was listening to the moment when one part of his life ended and another part began. He knew it now, sitting on the rug in the reading room with a stranger's daughter weeping softly on the telephone behind him. He understood that for some other family, on this rainy Thursday in March, this phone call was the one that did not come. And he was very glad of that, and he did not let himself think about why he was glad in the particular way that he was glad, because there was no good answer to that thinking, and his mother had taught him not to chase questions that did not have answers worth catching. After a few minutes, Walter said into the phone, "He is right here, Margaret. The young man, he is sitting on the floor by the radiator." "Yes." "His name is—" He turned his head, the phone still pressed to his ear. "Forgive me, young man, I have not properly asked." "Jonah, sir," Jonah said. "Jonah Reeves." "His name is Jonah Reeves," Walter said into the phone. "Yes, I know, Margaret." He listened for a moment longer. "She would like to thank you herself," he said to Jonah, holding the receiver out gently. "If you would not mind, she would like very much to speak to you." Jonah stood up. He came across the rug and took the receiver carefully in both hands the way a person takes something fragile. He pressed it to his ear. He could hear breathing on the other end, the steadying kind, the kind a person does when they have been crying and are trying to be a grown-up again before they speak. "Hello," he said. "Jonah." The woman's voice came through warm and shaking. "Jonah, my name is Margaret. I am Walter's daughter. I have been driving around this town for 2 hours looking for my father, and I want you to know, sweetheart, I want you to know that you are an angel. Do you hear me? You are an angel. Whatever happens for the rest of your life, you remember that on a Thursday in March, a woman you never met told you that you are an angel, and she meant it with everything she had." Jonah did not know what to say. He looked at the rug. He said, "I just walked him, ma'am." The corner where he was, it was the wrong one. Margaret made a small sound on the other end of the line, a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, the kind of sound a person makes when they realize that the child they are speaking to does not understand the size of what he has done, and that it would be wrong somehow to try to explain it to him. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly. "It was the wrong corner, and you knew, and you stopped. Will you stay with him at the library until I get there? I am 20 minutes away. I am in the car already. I am coming." "Yes, ma'am," Jonah said. "I will stay." "Bless you, child," Margaret said, and then her voice broke a little on the last word, and she said, "Could you put my father back on, please?" Jonah handed the receiver back to Walter, who took it and listened for another moment and then said, "Yes, Margaret, I will be here. Drive carefully. The roads are bad." He set the receiver gently back into its cradle. He sat for a moment with his hand still resting on it, as if to make sure the connection had really been made and would not undo itself. Then he looked up at Jonah, and his pale gray eyes were clear again, the way a window is clear after it has been wiped, and he said, "Jonah Reeves, will you sit with me until she comes?" "Yes, sir," Jonah said. "I will sit with you." Miss Adler must have heard the call end, because a moment later she came back into the reading room with a small tray. On the tray were 2 white mugs. One held tea, dark and steaming, with a thin slice of lemon floating in it. The other held cocoa, with a spoon already stirred into it and a small drift of foam on the top. There was also a plate with 4 shortbread cookies on it, the round buttery kind that Miss Adler kept in a tin behind the desk for children who came in shivering on winter afternoons. She set the tray down on the small wooden table without saying anything about it, the way a person sets food down when they understand that the people in the room are not yet ready to be looked at directly. She left again, and the door clicked softly behind her. Walter took the tea. Jonah took the cocoa. They sat for a while without speaking, the boy on the rug with the mug between his palms, the old man in the chair with the tea steaming up into his lined face. The radiator ticked. The rain murmured against the tall, narrow windows. Somewhere in the building, a clock struck 5 times in the small, soft way old library clocks strike, and the sound moved through the reading room and out again without disturbing anything. "My wife was named Alina," Walter said after a long time. He was not looking at Jonah. He was looking at the green leather books on the lower shelf by the window. "She was a reader. She read more books than any person I have ever known. When she was dying, 3 years ago this April, she made me promise that I would not stop coming to the library on Thursdays. We had come on Thursdays for 50 years. She said, 'Walter, do not let it become a thing you used to do.' She said, 'Walter, you must keep walking through that door even when I am not walking through it beside you.'" He was quiet for a moment. "I have been walking through it on Thursdays," he said. "Sometimes Margaret drives me. Sometimes I take the car service. Today I took the car service, but I asked the driver to let me off at the deli on Beacon because I wanted to buy a sandwich for my lunch tomorrow. And then I came out of the deli, and the rain had started, and I turned the wrong way on the sidewalk. I do not know why I turned the wrong way. I have known that sidewalk for 60 years. I turned the wrong way, and then I did not know how to turn back." Jonah did not say anything. He understood that Walter was not telling him the story to be answered. He was telling him the story because telling it out loud to a quiet listener was a way of putting it down. His grandmother did this too, sometimes, in the kitchen late at night when she thought he had gone to bed. She would tell stories to the empty chair across from her, stories about Jonah's mother as a little girl, about a dog they had once had named Patches, about a man she had almost married before Jonah's grandfather. He had learned a long time ago that the right thing to do when someone was putting a story down was to be the table the story could be set on. "She sounds nice, sir," Jonah said. "Your wife." Walter looked at him then. His eyes were wet, but the wetness was not sadness exactly, or not only sadness. It was the kind of wetness that comes into the eyes of a person who has just been given back, very briefly, something he has been missing for a long time. "She was," he said. "She was very nice." Margaret arrived 19 minutes later. Jonah heard the front door of the library open and the small bell above it give its soft chime, and then there were quick footsteps coming across the front room, the kind of footsteps a person makes when they have been trying not to run and have just stopped trying. Miss Adler said something in a low murmur from the desk, and a woman's voice answered, thank you, please, where?" And then Margaret was in the doorway of the reading room. She was perhaps 50 years old, with dark hair gone silver at the temples, pulled back into a low knot. She was wearing a navy raincoat that had been buttoned in a hurry, 2 of the buttons in the wrong holes, and her eyes were red-rimmed in the way eyes get red-rimmed when a person has cried while driving. She stopped just inside the door. She looked at her father in the chair by the radiator, and her hand went to her mouth, and she held it there for a moment as if she were keeping something inside that might otherwise come out. "Daddy," she said. Walter set his tea down on the small table. He stood up slowly, both hands on the arms of the chair, the way old men stand up, and he opened his arms, and Margaret crossed the rug in 3 quick steps and went into them. She was taller than he was. She had to bend slightly to put her face into his shoulder, and Jonah looked down at his Coco because watching them felt like watching something he had not been invited to watch. He could hear Margaret breathing in the careful, broken way of a person who is trying not to cry in front of her father because crying in front of her father would make him feel, on top of everything else, that he had frightened her. "I am sorry, Margaret," Walter said very quietly into her hair. "I am sorry, sweetheart, I am sorry." "Hush," she said. "Hush, Daddy, you are here, you are here." They stood like that for a long moment. Then Margaret stepped back, keeping one hand on her father's arm as if she did not quite trust the world yet to keep him where he was, and she turned and looked at Jonah on the rug, and her face did the thing again that her father's face had done under the awning on Beacon Street, the soft, slow change of a person seeing another person properly. She came across the rug and knelt down in front of him so that her eyes were level with his, and she did not touch him because she did not know him and she had been raised not to touch a child who did not know her, but she folded her hands carefully in her lap, the way a person folds her hands when she is about to say something she does not want to get wrong. "Jonah," she said. "May I call you Jonah?" "Yes, ma'am." "Jonah, I do not know how to thank you. I do not have the words for it yet. I am going to find the words eventually, but I do not have them today. So I am only going to say thank you, the small, ordinary words, and I am going to ask you to understand that I mean something very large by them. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Jonah said. He understood. He had been hearing large things said in small, ordinary words for most of his life. He understood the way of it. Margaret nodded once. She blinked twice hard, and then she said in a steadier voice, "Where do you live, sweetheart? Where can we take you? It is still raining, and it is getting dark, and I am not going to let you walk home alone after what you did for my father today. Tell me where to take you, and I will take you there." Jonah hesitated. He thought about his grandmother in the small house on Linden Street, who would be sitting in her chair by the front window with the lamp on and a worried look on her face because he was almost an hour later than usual. He thought about the library books still pressed against his ribs under his jacket, which he had not even checked out yet because he had crossed the street before he reached the desk. He thought about how it would look, a strange woman bringing him home in a strange car, and what his grandmother would think when she saw it. He thought then about how it would look if he came home on foot in the rain another half-hour later with the books damp and his shoes squelching, and how his grandmother would worry either way, and he understood that there was no version of this that did not involve some explaining. "My grandma's house, ma'am," he said. 84 Linden Street, across the river, but you do not have to. I can walk. It is not far." "It is far enough," Margaret said firmly, "and I am taking you." 84 Linden, thank you." She stood up. Miss Adler had quietly appeared in the doorway again with Jonah's library books in her hands. She had checked them out for him without being asked, and she had slipped them into a clean plastic bag from behind the desk so that they would stay dry on the ride home. She handed the bag to Jonah, and she squeezed his shoulder once more, and she said only, "Come back on Saturday, Jonah. I am holding the new Patterson for you." "Yes, ma'am," Jonah said. "Thank you, Miss Adler." The car parked at the curb outside the library was a dark blue sedan, not new but very well cared for, with a child's booster seat folded neatly in the back behind the driver's seat, and a soft tartan blanket folded across the rear bench. It was not the kind of car that announced anything about its owner except that the owner kept things tidy and drove carefully. Margaret helped her father into the front passenger seat first, fastening his belt for him the way she must have fastened a belt for him many times before, smoothing the collar of his damp coat, putting her palm for just a second against the side of his face the way a mother might touch a child she had nearly lost. Then she opened the rear door for Jonah and gestured to the tartan blanket. "Wrap up, sweetheart," she said. "You are still soaked through." Jonah climbed in carefully. He set the plastic bag of library books on the seat beside him. He pulled the tartan blanket across his lap. The car was warm. The wipers had been left running on low, and they ticked back and forth across the windshield with a soft, steady sound. Margaret got in and pulled the door shut and turned in her seat to look at him before she put the car in gear. 84 Linden Street, she said. "Across the bridge left on Cedar 2 blocks down." "Yes, ma'am. And your grandmother is expecting you?" "She is always expecting me, ma'am. She does not know I am late yet, but she will be looking out the window." Margaret nodded. She turned forward and put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb. The rain had slackened a little. The streetlights down Beacon Street were doubled in the wet pavement, each lamp making 2 lamps, one above and one below, and the town slid past the windows in soft golden pairs. For a while no one spoke. Walter had closed his eyes in the front seat, not asleep, but resting in the way a person rests when he has been afraid for a long time and the fear has finally let go of him. Margaret drove carefully across the river bridge, both hands on the wheel, and Jonah watched the dark water moving below them and the lights of the houses on the far bank and the steady ticking of the wipers. And he understood that he was tired, more tired than he had known. The warmth of the car was settling into him in a heavy way, and the blanket smelled faintly of cedar and laundry soap, and he had to make a small effort not to let his eyes close. They crossed the bridge. Margaret turned left on Cedar. 2 blocks down she slowed, and Jonah said, "There, ma'am, the little white house with the green shutters." She pulled up to the curb. The lamp in the front window of the little white house was on, exactly as Jonah had said it would be, and behind the lace curtain he could see the small shape of his grandmother sitting in her chair, her white head bowed over what was probably her crossword, looking up sharply now at the sound of a car stopping where no car usually stopped. "I will walk you to the door," Margaret said. "I would like, if it is all right, to introduce myself to your grandmother. I want her to know what her grandson did today. From me, not from anyone else." "Yes, ma'am," Jonah said. He understood that this, too, was a kind of kindness, the kind that thought ahead to what a worried grandmother might think when a strange car stopped at her curb, and what a story sounded like when it was told by the right person. Margaret got out and came around and opened Jonah's door. Walter in the front seat opened his eyes. "Jonah," he said, and his voice was clear and not lost at all. "Jonah, come here a moment, would you, before you go?" Jonah came around to the front passenger side. The window was rolled down. Walter reached out one thin-gloved hand and placed it very gently on top of Jonah's wet head, the way an old man might bless a grandson, and he said, "Thank you, young man. I'm going to remember this afternoon for as long as my mind will let me remember anything. And when my mind will not let me remember it anymore, I will still know somehow that it happened. Some things stay even after the rest goes. This will be one of those things." "Yes, sir," Jonah said. His throat had gone tight. "Go inside," Walter said. "Get warm. Tell your grandmother I am sorry to keep you in the rain so long." "Yes, sir." Margaret walked Jonah up the short cement path to the front door. His grandmother had already risen from her chair and was standing in the doorway by the time they reached it, a small woman in a blue cardigan with her hand pressed flat to her chest the way she pressed it when she was bracing for news. Margaret introduced herself quietly on the doorstep. She did not make a speech. She told the story in 3 sentences. She said that Jonah had stopped for her father on Beacon Street, that he had brought him to the library, that he had stayed with him until she could get there. She said, "Mrs. Reeves, your grandson is a remarkable young man, and I will not forget what he did today." Jonah's grandmother looked down at him. She did not say anything for a long moment. Then she put her thin arms around his shoulders, library books and damp jacket and all, and she pulled him in tight, and Jonah felt her breath shake once against the top of his head and then steady. Margaret did not stay long. She thanked Jonah's grandmother once more, very simply, and she walked back down the cement path to the car where her father was waiting. And Jonah and his grandmother stood in the doorway and watched the dark blue sedan pull away from the curb and turn at the corner and disappear toward the bridge. Then his grandmother closed the door and turned the lock and led him into the warm kitchen and made him stand by the radiator while she pulled off his wet jacket and his wet sneakers and his wet socks, clucking softly under her breath the way she always did when she was trying not to fuss. She heated soup. She cut bread. She did not ask him any questions until he had eaten, because she had been a mother once and was a grandmother now, and she knew the order of these things. He told her the whole story over the soup. She listened without interrupting, her thin hands folded around her own mug of tea, and when he was done she only said, "Your mother would be proud of you, baby. Your mother would be so proud." And Jonah, who had been holding something inside himself all afternoon without quite knowing it, let his shoulders come down at last and did not try to answer. He slept hard that night. He did not dream. He was at the kitchen table the next morning, eating cereal in his pajamas because it was Friday and he did not have school until 9, when he heard the sound outside. It was the sound of a long, quiet car pulling up to the curb of a street where long, quiet cars never pulled up. His grandmother heard it too. She set down her coffee and came to the front window and lifted a corner of the lace curtain, and Jonah came to stand beside her and they looked out together. The car was black and long and polished to a deep mirror shine, with the soft kind of wax finish that catches the morning light and holds it. A man in a dark suit was already out of the driver's seat and walking around to the rear passenger door. The door opened. Margaret stepped out first. Then Walter, slowly, one hand on the door frame, one hand on the cane he had not been carrying yesterday, a dark wooden cane with a brass handle that caught the sun. He was wearing a fresh coat this morning, a different one, charcoal gray, and a soft scarf the color of cream. He looked smaller in the daylight than he had looked under the awning on Beacon Street, but he also looked steadier, the way a person looks the morning after a fever has broken. Margaret carried a small wrapped parcel. Walter carried nothing but the cane. Jonah's grandmother said very quietly, "Oh." The doorbell rang. Jonah opened the door. He was still in his pajamas. He had not had time to change, and he understood somehow, looking up at the two of them on the front step, that it did not matter. Walter looked down at him and smiled, and the smile was the same smile he had given in the library reading room when he had recognized the green leather encyclopedias, the smile of a man who had found something he was afraid he had lost. "Good morning, young man," Walter said. "I hope it is not too early. I told Margaret last night that I would not sleep properly until I had stood on your doorstep in clear weather and thanked you with my hat in my hand, and as you can see, I have made her drive me here at an unreasonable hour to do exactly that." Margaret smiled over his shoulder. "He was up at 5, Mrs. Reeves," she said. "I am very sorry." "You are not sorry at all," Walter said without turning. "And neither am I," he looked back at Jonah. "May we come in for a few minutes? I have something I would like to say to you and to your grandmother together, and I would rather not say it on a doorstep." Jonah's grandmother had come up behind him. She opened the door wider. "Please," she said, "please come in." What Walter said in the small kitchen of the little white house on Linden Street that morning was not for a viral video, and it was not for a newspaper, and so most of it is not for this telling either. He said some things about his wife. He said some things about a promise. He said, quietly and without ceremony, that he and Margaret had spoken late into the night, and that they would like to be of help to Jonah and his grandmother in some particular practical ways if Jonah's grandmother would permit it, and he listed those ways plainly, the way a man lists items on a page, without making any of them feel like charity. There was a school. There was a fund. There was a standing invitation to Sunday lunch at 22 Elm Hollow Lane for as many Sundays as Jonah would like to come. There was a small Saturday job at a bookshop on Larchmere that belonged to a friend of Walter's, for when Jonah was old enough to want one. Jonah's grandmother listened. She cried once very briefly into a folded napkin, and then she steadied herself, and she said yes to some of it and not yet to other parts, the way a proud woman accepts help from a stranger who has become not quite a stranger overnight. The friendship that began on the corner of Beacon Street on a Thursday in March lasted for the rest of Walter Whitman's life. He came to Jonah's high school graduation in a wheelchair pushed by Margaret. He did not come to the college graduation. He had gone by then the way Eleanor had gone, quietly in the small hours, with Margaret holding one of his hands and a photograph on his bedside table of a boy in a borrowed jacket standing under a green awning in the rain. In Walter's there was a letter for Jonah. It said only this: "Some corners are the wrong corners, and some boys cross the street anyway. Be that boy for as long as you can. Walter." Jonah Reeves is 34 years old now. He is a social worker in Millbrook, Ohio. He drives an old blue sedan with a tartan blanket folded across the rear bench, and on rainy Thursdays in March, he drives slowly down Beacon Street with his eyes open, because some habits, once you start them, are the kind you keep. If this story touched something in you tonight, leave a comment and tell me what part you will carry with you, and subscribe so we can sit together again the next time a small kindness turns out to be a large one. Thank you for being here.